The wind howled across the endless white wasteland, carrying with it sharp shards of ice that lashed at anything brave enough to stand against it. Aiden Cross huddled inside his insulated igloo, its thick walls humming faintly with the power of geothermal energy. It was a world of silence and solitude, one that Aiden had chosen after losing everything. The icy plains of this frozen earth were all he knew now, a bitter but familiar companion. Aiden was a man of habit. Every day began with routine maintenance of his igloo systems, followed by hunting for scarce food in the snow-covered wilderness. Tonight, however, something disrupted his quiet existence. As he sat near his heater, sipping a steaming cup of synthesized broth, a sharp alarm blared from the corner of the room. His motion sensors had detected something, or someone, outside. Frowning, Aiden moved quickly to the control panel. The screen displayed a flickering image of the outside. Through the swirling snow, a faint figure appeared, crawling weakly across the ice. Aiden squinted, unsure if he was seeing a person or a trick played by the storm. The figure collapsed just as the image cut out. "Damn it," he muttered. He pulled on his heavy thermal suit, its bulk designed to protect him from the merciless cold. Outside, the storm roared, biting at his exposed face. The temperature was lethal to any unprotected life, and Aiden wondered what kind of fool would wander into this desolation. His boots crunched against the ice as he trudged toward the figure. As he approached, Aiden's heart skipped a beat. The figure wasn't human, not entirely. Lying motionless in the snow was a slender form, humanoid but distinctly alien. Her skin shimmered like ice crystals, pale blue with faint lines of iridescent light running through it. She wore a tattered alien suit that barely clung to her body, offering little protection against the cold. Her face was delicate, almost fragile, with large, glowing eyes half closed in pain. "Help, please." A voice, faint and broken, reached his ears. Aiden froze in disbelief. She was speaking, barely, in Galactic Standard, the universal trade language humanity had adopted when contact with other species began decades ago. Against every survival instinct screaming at him to leave her, Aiden knelt down. Her breath was shallow, her body trembling violently in the freezing wind. If he left her out here, she'd be dead in minutes. Muttering curses under his breath, he scooped her up, shocked at how cold her body felt, like holding a living piece of ice. Aiden carried her back to his igloo, the storm biting at his back. Inside, he laid her gently on a makeshift cot near the heater. Her glow flickered weakly as she struggled to stay conscious. "Don't die on me," Aiden muttered, scrambling to adjust the heat to a level he hoped would stabilize her. The alien's faint voice returned. Warmth. Safe. For the first time in years, Aiden's quiet world had been shattered, and he wasn't sure what to make of it. The igloo's interior was bathed in the soft glow of LED lights, their warmth a sharp contrast to the icy world outside. Aiden knelt beside the strange alien woman, his hands moving quickly as he adjusted the thermal blanket around her. Her crystalline skin sparkled faintly in the light, but her face remained pale, and her glowing eyes fluttered shut. "Stay with me," Aiden muttered, his voice low but urgent. He wasn't used to talking to anyone, much less an alien. He grabbed his medkit, knowing full well it wasn't designed for non-human biology, but it was all he had. The alien stirred weakly as he placed a thermal patch on her chest, hoping it would help stabilize her temperature. "What are you doing out here?" Aiden asked, more to himself than to her. He wasn't expecting an answer, but to his surprise, her lips moved. "Crash. Ship," she whispered, her voice fragile and accented but understandable. Aiden froze. A crash. That explained her condition. He leaned closer. "You crashed. Where?" Her glowing eyes opened slightly, filled with pain and desperation. "Far. Ice. Broken. Need. Safe." Each word seemed to drain her of strength. Aiden nodded, his mind racing. He didn't know where her ship was, But if it had crashed nearby, it could attract unwanted attention. Earth's frozen wastelands were desolate, but they weren't entirely abandoned. Scavengers and patrol drones roamed the tundra, always on the lookout for alien technology to loot or report. "All right, first things first," he said, focusing on her immediate survival. He reached for a bottle of nutrient solution and held it to her lips. "Drink this. It's not much, but it'll help." She hesitated, her glowing eyes locking onto his for a moment, as if trying to gauge his intentions. Then, with great effort, she sipped from the bottle. Aiden watched as a faint glow returned to the lines on her skin, a sign of life rekindling. "What's your name?" he asked, hoping to keep her conscious. Her lips moved again, forming a sound that was melodic yet alien. "Tessarin," she said finally. "Tessarin," Aiden repeated, testing the unfamiliar syllables. "I'm Aiden. You're lucky I found you. Another hour out there. Well, you wouldn't have made it." Saren didn't respond, but her eyes softened slightly, a silent acknowledgement of his help. Aiden sat back, exhaling deeply. He wasn't sure what he'd just gotten himself into. An alien crash survivor in his isolated igloo. This wasn't how he expected his quiet life to go. Still, he couldn't just turn her away. Her fragility stirred something in him, something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of responsibility. He glanced at the faintly glowing lines on her skin, wondering about her story and what dangers might follow her. As the storm outside raged on, Aiden realized one thing. His simple life had just become a lot more complicated, and for the first time in years, he wasn't entirely unhappy about it. The storm outside showed no signs of letting up. The wind screamed, battering against the igloo's reinforced walls. Inside, the faint hum of Aiden's geothermal heater created a fragile bubble of warmth and safety. Saren lay on the cot, her breathing steadier now, but still shallow. Aiden sat nearby, his mind torn between curiosity and caution. He had questions, a million of them. Who was she? Why had she crashed here? And more importantly, was anyone looking for her? Yet, he knew better than to overwhelm her. For now, survival was the priority. Saren's glowing eyes fluttered open again. She turned her head slowly, taking in her surroundings. Aiden noticed her gaze linger on the heater, the lights, and finally on him. She seemed wary but not hostile. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice soft but gaining strength. "You're in my igloo," Aiden replied, leaning forward slightly. "I found you outside during the storm. You were half frozen." She nodded weakly, as if piecing together fragments of memory. "You saved me." "Yeah, well, you didn't give me much choice," Aiden said, his tone gruff but not unkind. "What were you doing out there?" "You mentioned a crash." Saren hesitated, her glowing eyes flickering faintly. "My ship. Attacked. Forced to land. The cold, too much. Attacked." Aiden's eyebrows shot up. This was worse than he thought. If someone had attacked her, they might still be nearby. "Who attacked you?" "The Terrelics," she said, her voice tinged with fear. "They hunt us, for our technology." Aiden frowned. He had heard stories of the Terrelics, a ruthless, warlike species known for scavenging advanced alien tech and enslaving weaker races. If they were involved, this was no ordinary crash. "You're saying they're here, on Earth?" he asked, his tone urgent. Tessarin nodded slowly. "They will come, to finish what they started." Aiden cursed under his breath. He had spent years avoiding trouble, hiding away in this frozen wasteland to escape the chaos of the galaxy. Now, trouble had literally crawled to his doorstep. But as he looked at Tessarin, her fragile state, her trembling form, he couldn't just turn her away. She needed his help, and he couldn't ignore that. "All right," he said, his voice firm. "First, we need to keep you alive. Then we'll figure out what to do about these Terrelics." Do you think they'll track you here? Saren hesitated before nodding. If they detect my signal. Aiden's eyes narrowed. Your ship. It's still up there, isn't it? Sending out signals. She nodded again. Damaged, but still active. Great, Aiden muttered. He stood, pacing the small space. If the Terralex found her ship, they'd come here next. He needed a plan. Fast. Turning to Tessarin, he said, if we're going to survive this, you'll need to trust me. Can you do that? Her glowing eyes locked onto his, and after a long moment, she gave a faint nod. Yes, I trust you. For the first time in years, Aiden felt a sense of purpose. Trouble was coming, but this time, he wouldn't face it alone. The storm had calmed by morning, but the tension inside the igloo was only beginning to rise. Aiden stood near the small window, staring out at the endless expanse of white. His mind churned with plans and possibilities, none of them particularly good. Behind him, Tessarin sat up weakly on the cot, her shimmering skin looking slightly more vibrant after a night of rest. You're stronger today, Aiden said, glancing back at her. Thanks to you, she replied, her voice still soft but steadier now. She looked at him, her glowing eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and worry. But strength won't matter if the Terralex find us. Aiden exhaled sharply. You keep mentioning the Terralex. Why are they after you? Saren hesitated, as if weighing whether to reveal the truth. Finally, she said, the Illyrians, my people, we possess technology they desire. Our bodies are bioenergetic. The light you see on my skin, it's a form of living energy, capable of powering entire systems. Aiden frowned, leaning against the wall. So, they're hunting you for energy. Not just energy, Tessarin said, shaking her head. Our technology is advanced, far beyond most known species. The Terralex don't just want to use it, they want to weaponize it. If they succeed, no one will be safe. Aiden let out a low whistle. And you brought all of that trouble to my doorstep. Her expression turned pained. I didn't mean to. My ship, it was my only chance to escape. When they attacked, I had no choice but to land here. The cold, it's deadly to my kind. If you hadn't found me. She trailed off, her gaze dropping to the floor. Aiden felt a pang of guilt. He knew she hadn't asked for this. She was running, just trying to survive. He sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. All right, let's focus on the now. Your ship, how far is it? Not far, Tessarin said. It crashed into the ice, west of here. The systems are damaged, but it's still transmitting. That's bad, Aiden said, pushing away from the wall. If the Terralex are nearby, that signal is like a beacon. We need to shut it down. Tessarin nodded. But there's something else. My ship contains a defensive emitter, a weapon. If we can reach it, we might have a chance to protect ourselves. Aiden crossed his arms, thinking. He didn't like the idea of venturing out into the icy wasteland, but staying here wasn't an option either. If they waited, the Terralex would find them. Action was their only hope. All right, he said finally. We'll go to your ship. But if we're going to survive this, I need to know one thing. Can I count on you to keep up? Saren straightened, determination flashing in her glowing eyes. Yes, I won't let them win. Aiden gave a small nod. Good. Then let's get moving. The clock's ticking. As they prepared to leave, Aiden couldn't shake the feeling that their fight was only just beginning. The icy wind clawed at them as Aiden and Tessarin trudged through the frozen wasteland. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a pale bluish glow over the endless expanse of snow and ice. Aiden's insulated boots crunched against the frozen ground, while Tessarin moved with surprising grace, her shimmering skin glowing faintly in the cold. Aiden glanced at her, marveling at how her light seemed to defy the bleakness around them. You're handling this better than I thought, he said, adjusting the strap of his pack. Saren gave a faint smile. I've adapted. Your help has made me stronger. She paused, her gaze scanning the horizon. but the cold, it still drains me. Aiden nodded. We'll get to your ship soon. Just stay close. The trek was grueling, the bitter wind cutting through even Aiden's heavy thermal gear. Saren, though resilient, began to slow. Her glow dimmed slightly, and Aiden noticed her steps faltering. You all right? He asked, stopping to check on her. I'm fine, she said, though her voice betrayed her fatigue. We must keep moving. Aiden frowned but didn't press. He knew she was pushing herself, and there was no room for weakness out here. They continued on, the terrain growing more treacherous as they approached the crash site. Large ice formations jutted from the ground like jagged teeth, creating a maze of frozen obstacles. Finally, they saw it, a dark shape protruding from the ice ahead. Sasaran's ship, partially buried, its sleek, metallic hull glinting faintly in the weak sunlight. The vessel was small, clearly designed for speed rather than combat. It bore scorch marks from energy weapons, evidence of the Terralic attack. That's it, Sasaran said, her voice filled with both relief and sorrow. What's left of it? As they approached, Aiden's eyes scanned the area. Something felt off. The snow around the ship was disturbed, as if something, or someone, had been there recently. He held up a hand, signaling Sasaran to stop. What's wrong? She asked, her glowing eyes narrowing. Aiden knelt, examining the tracks. They were faint but unmistakable. Mechanical footprints, likely from drones. We're not alone, he said, his voice low. Saren tensed, her glow flickering. Terralic drones, she whispered. They must have found the signal. Aiden reached into his pack, pulling out a compact energy rifle. It was an old model, but it would have to do. Stay behind me. Let's move carefully. They crept toward the ship, their movements slow and deliberate. The air was heavy with tension, every crunch of snow beneath their boots amplified in the silence. As they rounded the ship's hull, Aiden spotted it, a Terralic drone, its sleek metallic frame glinting as it scanned the area. Dane, Aiden muttered. He raised his rifle, aiming carefully. The drone's red eye flicked toward them, and a sharp alarm blared. Run, Aiden shouted, pulling the trigger. The shot hit the drone, sparks flying, but more alarms echoed through the icy air. As they sprinted toward the ship, Aiden realized the fight had only just begun. Aiden's heart raced as the Terralic drone's alarm shrieked through the cold air. The moment he fired, everything seemed to move in slow motion. Sparks flew from the drone as it staggered, but it didn't fall. Instead, it adjusted its stance and aimed its weapon at them. Keep moving, Aiden yelled to Sasaran, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the open hatch of the wrecked ship. They dashed toward the ship, the sound of the drone's high-pitched whine getting louder as it powered up. Behind them, the drone's weapon fired, sending a pulse of energy that narrowly missed them. The ground around them sizzled as Aiden pushed Sasaran through the ship's broken hatchway, just as another pulse hit the wall beside them. The door slammed shut behind them, and they both dropped to the ground, panting. Inside, the ship was a maze of shattered walls and broken tech, its once sleek interior now a collection of twisted metal and exposed wires. Aiden quickly scanned the room, taking in the damage. We have to find the control room. Sasaran gasped, her voice strained. The defensive emitter, it's there. Aiden nodded, scanning the wreckage. The ship had clearly taken a beating, but he could see faint signs of power still running through some of the systems. Glowing lights flickered on the damaged consoles, and faint hums came from deeper within the ship. Stay close, Aiden muttered, leading the way through the wreckage. They carefully picked their way around exposed beams and cracked panels. The temperature inside was much colder than Aiden had hoped. His breath misted in the air, and he could feel the chill creeping into his bones. As they moved deeper into the ship, Sasaran's steps began to slow. Aiden glanced at her, her skin flickering dimly with the strain of the cold. We're almost there, he said, trying to reassure her. But she didn't respond. Her eyes, once a bright glow, were now fading as the cold drained her energy. Aiden could see her struggle to keep moving, her body trembling from the exertion. "Hold on," he said, grabbing her arm to support her. "We need to get to that emitter. Fast." They reached a corridor where the walls had collapsed in on themselves. The control room was just beyond, and Aiden could see the glimmer of the emitter's core through the wreckage. It was their only chance. Suddenly, the sound of clanking metal echoed from the hallway behind them. Aiden's pulse quickened. He turned, eyes darting to the entrance of the corridor. The derelict drone had followed them into the wreckage. "Get to the emitter," Aiden shouted. "I'll handle this." Saren hesitated, her fading glow barely visible, but she nodded. She moved toward the control room as fast as she could, her legs unsteady. Aiden crouched behind a piece of wreckage, raising his rifle. He knew he didn't have much time before the drone closed in. He took a deep breath, focused, and steadied his aim. The drone's glowing red eye blinked in his direction. Then, in an instant, it fired. Aiden's shot rang out at the same time. The drone's energy blast narrowly missed him, and Aiden's rifle hit its target. The drone staggered, sparks flying from its body. It let out an alarmed whine before collapsing to the floor. Aiden didn't waste a second. He rushed toward the control room to help Saren, knowing they were running out of time. The control room of the wrecked ship was dim, its flickering lights casting eerie shadows on the walls. Aiden could hear the faint hum of power still running through the systems, but the room was far from stable. Panels were torn open, wires dangled loosely, and the air smelled of burnt electronics. But in the center of the chaos, Saren stood, her body shaking with exhaustion, but her eyes focused on the glowing core of the defensive emitter. Aiden hurried to her side, wiping the sweat from his brow. His heart was still racing from the fight with the derelict drone, but they couldn't afford to rest. Not now. "Is this it?" he asked, his voice tense. Saren nodded weakly, her glowing skin dimming as she bent over the control panel. "Yes, but the system is damaged. It will take time to restore full power. We need to be fast." Aiden glanced at the doorway. The sound of distant drone engines echoed through the wreckage, growing louder. They had no time to waste. "We don't have much time. Can you fix it?" Saren's fingers moved swiftly over the control panel, her eyes narrowed in concentration. "I can try, but it will require my full energy." Aiden clenched his fists, his mind racing. "How long?" "Minutes, maybe less," she said, her voice strained. "But the longer we wait, the harder it will be to defend ourselves. The derelict will come for us." Aiden knew she was right. He quickly scanned the room. "I'll cover you," he said, pulling out his rifle and moving toward the doorway. "You just focus on getting that thing working." Saren gave him a faint nod. As Aiden took up a defensive position, he could hear the low hum of derelict drones moving closer. He knew they wouldn't stop until they found her, until they found the ship and its technology. Aiden's grip tightened around his rifle as he scanned the wreckage outside the control room. The drones could be anywhere, and they were deadly. But he wasn't about to let Saren face them alone. A faint click echoed from the hallway, followed by a soft whirring noise. A drone appeared at the far end of the corridor, its red eye glowing like a predator in the dark. It hovered just outside the doorway, scanning the room for signs of life. Aiden's pulse quickened. He raised his rifle and fired a shot. The blast hit the drone squarely in its chest, sending it crashing to the floor. It lay still for a moment before sparking and twitching, but Aiden knew it wouldn't get up. But the noise of the blast had drawn attention. More drones were coming. "We don't have long," Aiden called out to Saren. "Hurry." Saren's voice came back, strained but determined. "I'm almost there. Just keep them off me." Aiden felt the pressure building in his chest as he reloaded. The derelicts were relentless. If they couldn't finish what they started, they would keep coming until they did. Another drone appeared in the doorway. Aiden fired again, but this time, the shot missed. The drone swerved and fired back, a blast of energy barely grazing his shoulder. Damn. Aiden cursed, ducking behind a piece of wreckage for cover. Sweat dripped down his face as he reloaded. Hurry. To Saren. Saren's voice, strained but steady, echoed from the control panel. Just a little longer. Aiden clenched his jaw, refusing to let the Terralex win. Every second felt like an eternity, but he knew they had no choice. They had to survive. The control room was filled with the tension of a storm just before it broke. Aiden crouched behind the wreckage, his rifle aimed at the hallway, sweat dripping down his face. He could hear the drones moving closer, more of them this time. The sound of their mechanical whirs and beeps sent a chill through him, but he couldn't afford to hesitate. Saren, across the room, was still working on the emitter. Her fingers moved in swift, delicate motions, tapping commands on the damaged console. Her skin flickered faintly, a sign that her energy was running low, but she kept going determined. "You've got to hurry," Aiden muttered to himself, glancing over his shoulder at the control panel. The drones were closing in fast. He adjusted his position, keeping his rifle trained on the corridor. It wouldn't be long before they realized he was there. He had to act fast. His ears rang with the sound of metallic footsteps echoing from the other side. The drones were coming. Aiden's heart raced as the first drone appeared at the entrance of the control room. It was a larger unit, with multiple arms designed for combat. Its red eye glowed bright, scanning the area. Aiden didn't wait. He fired first, the shot ringing out in the silence. The drone staggered, sparks flying from its frame. But it didn't fall. It only advanced, its weapon charging up. Aiden ducked just as a pulse of energy blasted through the air where he had been standing. The force of it shook the room, but Aiden was already moving, rolling to the side and firing another shot. This time, the drone dropped to the ground, its limbs twitching. But there was no time to celebrate. The sound of more drones approaching was unmistakable. Aiden's pulse spiked as he looked back at Saren. She was still at the console, her face strained with effort. "Saren," Aiden shouted, his voice tight with urgency. "Can you finish it?" "I'm trying," she gasped, her breath shallow. "Just a few more seconds. Hold them off." Aiden nodded, swallowing his fear. He couldn't stop now. As more drones began to filter into the room, Aiden fired again, his shots precise and quick. The drones fell one by one, their bodies sparking and smoking. But for every drone that fell, two more appeared in the doorway. The battle was relentless. Saren's voice was barely audible over the sounds of the firefight. "It's ready. Now." Aiden barely had time to process her words before the defensive emitter came to life. A low hum filled the room, and a bright blue energy shield expanded outward from the emitter, surrounding them. Aiden's breath caught in his throat as the first drone charged at them, only to slam into the energy field with a loud crack. The drone bounced back, sparks flying from its damaged body. "Nice work," Aiden shouted, relief flooding through him. But the victory was short-lived. The drones, now realizing their attack was futile, began to retreat. Aiden watched as they regrouped in the hallway, clearly planning their next move. "We're not out of the woods yet," Aiden said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "Stay alert." Saren nodded, her glow flickering weakly but still steady. "We have to keep them from calling for backup. If they get reinforcements, we're finished." Aiden turned his gaze toward the control panel, knowing their fight was far from over. The siege had only just begun. The energy shield hummed steadily around them, the faint blue glow a constant reminder of their fragile safety. Aiden wiped the sweat from his brow as he kept his rifle aimed at the doorway, every nerve on edge. The drums had backed off, but he knew that wouldn't last. They were regrouping, probably sending for reinforcements. The question wasn't if they would come, it was when. Saren stood beside him, her face pale but determined. The glow on her skin had dimmed even further, and her breath was coming in shallow gasps. Aiden could see the strain in her eyes, but she was pushing herself harder than ever. "We need to act now," she said, her voice quiet but urgent. "The longer we stay here, the more drones will arrive. I sent a distress signal to my people. They'll be here, but not soon enough if we don't move quickly." Aiden nodded, his mind already racing with possibilities. The emitter was a powerful tool, but it wouldn't last forever. And once the Terralex realized what they were up against, they would adjust their tactics. They had to leave the ship before it became a death trap. "Where do we go from here?" Aiden asked, his voice low as he kept an eye on the hallway. "My ship's distress signal is active," Tassarin replied. "If we can get to the communication relay, we can amplify the signal. My people will know exactly where we are. We won't have to wait much longer." Aiden considered this for a moment. The relay would be in the heart of the ship, right where the Terralex would expect them to be. It was a risk, but it was their only chance. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "We move fast. Keep your head down, and don't stop unless I say so." Tassarin nodded, taking a deep breath and straightening up, though the effort clearly took a toll on her. Aiden had no time to think about it. He could see the shadows of more drones approaching in the hallway, their metallic bodies glinting in the low light. "Let's go," Aiden ordered, and they started moving, the shield still protecting them as they hurried deeper into the wrecked ship. The halls were eerily quiet now, the buzzing of distant drones the only sound. Aiden's senses were on high alert, his rifle ready in case they ran into more trouble. As they reached the central corridor, they could hear the soft whirring of Terralic drones just beyond a set of doors. Aiden held up his hand, signaling Tassarin to stop. He needed to make a plan. If they tried to push through without a distraction, they'd be surrounded. They had to act fast. "I'll draw them out," Aiden whispered. "You stay back and move as quietly as you can. Get to the relay, and I'll cover you." Saren hesitated for a moment, her glowing eyes meeting his with an unspoken question. But she didn't argue. She simply nodded, trusting him. Aiden took a deep breath, adjusting his rifle. He knew it was dangerous, but there was no time to second-guess. He peeked around the corner and fired a single shot into the ceiling. The noise was deafening, and he quickly ducked back behind cover. The drones immediately reacted, charging toward him. "Now, Tassarin," he shouted. Without wasting a second, she darted past him, her movements swift and graceful despite her exhaustion. Aiden kept his rifle aimed, firing on the drones as they approached. His shots were precise, but he knew he couldn't keep this up for long. Tassarin reached the relay room, her hands moving quickly over the control panel. Aiden's heart raced as he fired once more, dropping another drone. But there were more coming, and they were closing in fast. Tassarin's voice crackled through his comms. "The signal is amplified. They know where we are." Aiden grinned. They weren't out of danger yet, but reinforcements were on their way. And for the first time in what felt like forever, they had a fighting chance. Aiden's heart pounded in his chest as the sound of Terralic drones echoed through the ship's halls. He had given everything to get Tassarin to the relay room, and now, with the signal sent, all they could do was wait for her people to arrive. The sound of drones moving closer sent a chill through his body, but there was a new feeling too. Hope. They had done it. The signal was out, and now they just had to hold out. Tassarin was still at the control panel, her face drawn with exhaustion. Her glowing skin flickered weakly, a sure sign of how much energy she had used. Aiden could see the toll it had taken on her, but she didn't let it show on her face. She was focused, determined. Her people were coming for her. "Any sign of your ship?" Aiden asked, trying to keep the worry out of his voice. "Soon," she said, her voice steady despite the strain. "But we can't wait here much longer. The Terralex will be back, and they'll bring everything they've got." Aiden nodded, his grip tightening on his rifle. "Then we don't wait." He glanced around the control room, trying to come up with a plan. The ship was falling apart, and he knew it wouldn't take long for the Terralex to figure out where they were hiding. But he wasn't going to let that stop them. They had to survive. Tessarin's people were coming, but until then, it was up to him to protect them. "Come on," Aiden said, moving to the door. "We can't sit around and wait. We need to move." Sarin stood with difficulty, her legs unsteady as she made her way over to him. Her eyes were tired, but there was fire in them still. "Where to?" Aiden looked down the corridor, knowing their time was running out. "We get to the escape pod. It's the safest place we can go." Tessarin nodded, though her movements were slower than before. "Lead the way." They moved carefully through the wreckage, the sounds of distant drones growing louder. Aiden's senses were sharp, every sound in the air making him tense. He led Tessarin down a narrow passageway, the wreckage of the ship surrounding them. The escape pod was their only hope. If they could make it there, they could wait for reinforcements to arrive. But as they rounded a corner, Aiden's eyes went wide. A Terralek patrol stood in their path, blocking the way to the escape pod. Aiden's heart skipped a beat. There were at least 5 drones, and they were heavily armed. "Not good," Aiden muttered under his breath. Sarin's eyes flickered. "We can fight them," she said, her voice low but confident. Aiden shook his head. "We don't have time for a fight. We'll have to outrun them." Without another word, he grabbed her hand, pulling her behind him as he sprinted down the corridor. The drones immediately began to pursue, their heavy footsteps echoing in the narrow space. Aiden's legs burned as he ran, but he didn't stop. They reached the escape pod door just as the drones rounded the corner. Aiden slammed his hand onto the control panel, the door sliding open with a hiss. "Tessarin, get in," he shouted, shoving her inside. She hesitated for just a moment, looking back at him. "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you," Aiden said, his voice steady. "Go." Sarin didn't argue. She stepped into the pod, and Aiden followed, just as the door slammed shut behind him. The pod's engines roared to life, and with a powerful thrust, they shot out into the sky, leaving the wrecked ship behind. As they broke through the atmosphere, Aiden looked out the small window at the endless stretch of space. Sarin's people were coming, and for the first time in a long time, Aiden allowed himself to believe they were going to be all right. As the stars stretched out before them, Aiden knew that this was just the beginning. Their fight wasn't over, but the dawn of a new chapter was finally here.